All right. Before I forget, a week from today, what we'll do, and I'll post an announcement in Blackboard for next Tuesday. All of you will be, for all practical purposes, an online student. I'll be going to the ETS, Evangelical Theological Society meetings in Rhode Island, and I'll be leaving on a jet plane in the morning, earlier in the day on Tuesday. Yeah, there's a song there. Thank you. And on my way, I'm going to be going traveling with my wife. That'll be exciting. We get to go together and hang out with some old friends. So, but I'm just going to do depending on how far we get tonight, or how far my brain lets me get tonight. It's been a long day. I'm going to wrap up it's typically more consolidated because there's no breaks. It's just something we'll get into and finish whatever we don't finish with Daniel, and move into next week's prophet. And you get to watch that, and I'll record that in my office. So we'll do that next week, and then we'll just keep on. Then there's a Thanksgiving break week, everybody, and then we come back for one more live session the following week. And that's our last live class session. Yeah. So we'll finish the rest of the minor prophets that we have when we get back. Now, at this point, we're making a transition beginning in verse 7, chapter 7, to all of the vision material that we've kind of referred to, this apocalyptic type material, Daniel's visions from chapter 7 all the way through chapter 12. But up until this point, what I have here is kind of an alignment of the stars. I guess Jared and you and I were talking about it at break. It's interesting, and Jared was pointing out the idea that God is really he's really working overtime to get the attention of these, in this case, these kings. And if we've got Darius the Mede operating in chapter 6, which is really Cyrus the Persian king, what we really are impressed with is what God is doing through these miraculous events to you might say, work overtime. Jared was making the contrast. Why didn't God just do this back home, right? That was your point. Back when there was still time. Well, he was speaking through prophets, and the kings weren't listening very well as the people. God did provide a miraculous event, namely the Babylonians who came and started threatening the Jews in Jerusalem with regards to trying to get their attention on all of that. But in this case, he's working through these miraculous provisions through the prophet Daniel and his friends. But let's move on here. So if it's true, and referred to this earlier, that Isaiah, the prophet, is already named as Cyrus' servant, and back in chapter 44, in Isaiah chapter 44, verses 24 through 28. Eventually, this Cyrus, who comes on the scene as the Persian king, will issue one of the most significant decrees ever decreed for the benefit of the people of God. So it's interesting, and I speculated before, what if Cyrus had, like any ancient king, was in charge of building his library, accidentally stumbled across an Isaiah scroll, and his wise men read this and said, "Hey, Cyrus, there's something interesting that this ancient Israelite prophet Isaiah had written down. Maybe you should read it," that kind of a thing. We also have in the prophet Jeremiah the 70 years of exile predicted as well. We see in Daniel chapter 9, let's look there, Daniel chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. In Daniel's prayer, Daniel's awareness of this prediction from Jeremiah. Let's see, what did I leave off with? Kelsey, why don't you read for us in chapter 9, verses 1 through 2.
Daniel, right?
Yep.
Okay. And just verse 2, or just start
again? Chapter 9, verses 1 and 2.
Okay. In the first year of Darius, the son of
Ahasuerus,
by descendant of Mede, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, perceived in the books the number of years that, according to the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet, must pass before the end of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years.
So there's an awareness of Daniel, of course, of Jeremiah's prediction with regarding to the length, the overall length of the exile. So there's close proximity. If that's Darius the Mede, a.k.a. Cyrus, there might be some overlap there with, Daniel himself saying, there's something here I want you to read, King. So Cyrus would have had a personal encounter with the miraculous provision and protection from the God of the Jews. He could have had knowledge of the anticipation of his rule as it relates to the Jews in some beneficial way from Isaiah. And really this idea of, would he have known of his role as it would benefit the Jews from all of these things? So there's an interesting possibility there as well. Let's talk about chapter 7 through 12. So these visions that now are coming in, and really these visions spread out over the entire Babylonian and Persian period, as we'll see. These are visions that this apocalyptic material is going to extend into the future. We think the predictive potential of these prophets. So we're leaving the critical discussion behind here. We will recognize that Daniel's visions are not just going to be limited to only, let's see, what am I trying to say here? Okay, we've kind of talked about this before. Daniel's ability to predict the future with regards to the events of the 2nd century BC, but also not only focusing and predicting those events with regards to Antiochus IV, but also future establishment of the kingdom of God in the coming day of the Lord. So we're going to anticipate both of those things. Let's see here. So Daniel's first vision. Let's take a look at Daniel chapter 7. Now back to Daniel chapter 7. Chapter 7, verses 1 through 3. Vision of the 4 beasts. Let's have Bridget over here. Would you read for us?
In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another.
So 4 beasts coming out of the sea. There's going to be, in addition, a little horn, and this is followed by a judgment scene where the Ancient One, or the Ancient of Days, is going to sit on a wheeled throne surrounded by heavenly beings. Similar, it sounds like, to Ezekiel chapter 1 in that vision that we saw. So the last horn of the 4th beast is destroyed. Keep reading there in verse 11. Chapter 7, verse 11.
I looked then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking, and as I looked, the beast was killed and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire.
And then after that, we see some of the details here in verse 13 and 14 given with regards to one like the Son of Man, who's presented to God with the role of judge and is given an everlasting kingship over all of the nations. So read verse 13 and 14.
I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed.
So here we have kind of the future kingdom of the one like the Son of Man was coming. He comes up as the Ancient of Days. This is in anticipation of the day of the Lord and the kingdom that will be established by the coming Lord. Verse 15 through 18. We have an interpretation. It's brief, but it's offered by one of the heavenly beings himself. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was distressed within me, verse 15, and the visions in my mind kept alarming me. I approached one of those who were standing by and began asking him the exact meaning of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. So verse 17, these great beasts, which are four in number, are four kings who will arise from the earth, but the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, for all ages to come. So we're back to the ultimate kingdom that will be established, and with regards to the saints who will be participating in the kingdom that lasts forever in verse 18. That would have been good news, right, to the exiles, hearing that and understanding what's our role in all of this, Daniel. Well, you've got a place, you've got a spot. You're going to be participating in this eternal kingdom, and all the nations of the world will be bowing in reverence. This would have been encouragement to the exiles. Interesting, though, in this vision, if we move over to verse 27, there's more. In verse 27, then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. It's interesting that Daniel's vision here in terms of God's sovereign rule will be more and include more than just earthly kingdoms, but will also seem to be and also include the dominions of the unseen world, according to verse 27. That reminds us of some New Testament context. Let's look to Colossians chapter 1. We see a little bit of glimpse from Paul into the unseen world. How far does the Lord's dominion extend, right? Chapter 1, verse 16. For by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on the earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones, and here's the word that Daniel was using, or dominions, or rulers, or authorities. All things have been created by him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So the ultimate rule of the Lord, right? We see a continuity there. But Daniel, it's coming through in some of his visions as well. Now we have another vision during the reign of Belshazzar, and we turn to chapter 8. And this vision will be interpreted by the angel Gabriel. And let's look at his interpretation of in chapter 8, verses 15 down through verse 17. See here, who can I pick on next? Michael, here in the front row. Read for us in chapter 8, verse 15 through verse 17. Maybe a little more there. Yep.
Daniel had seen the vision, saw to understand it. Before there stood, and behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man, and I heard the man's voice between the banks of the
Ulai.
And he called Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So he came here where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened and fell to my face. He said to me, understand, O son of man, that the vision is for the time of the end.
Okay, so this interpreted vision here will focus again on the Greek Empire. The great horn of the male goat will, chapter in verse 9, out of one of them came forth a rather small horn which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land. And again in verse 21, we have the shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece, and the large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Alexander the Great probably is being referred to here. After his death, his empire is divided out among 4 generals, and we have that division back in verse 8. As soon as he was mighty, the large horn was broken, and in its place there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven. So the 4 generals that arise after Alexander the Great. The little horn in verse 9 that we read, this is going to refer to Antiochus Epiphanes IV that we've been referring to here. At the end that is predicted in this vision is the end of the time of Antiochus Epiphanes IV after the desecration of the temple. And we have that referred to in verse 11. What did this little horn do? It even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host, and it removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. That's verse 11. So let's move on. So now we move on to chapter 9. Let's see. What do I want to do here? Okay, I'm going to call an audible. I am going to call an audible, and I'm going to include the rest of this conversation from chapter 9 to the end and include that in my recorded video that I'll make available next week. So we'll get to watch that. My brain will be a little more clear and a little more capable, and we'll do that and make it all nice, bright, and shiny. We'll watch that next week, and with the next discussion that we'll have next week. So be looking for that. I'll post an announcement on Blackboard for you about that. And don't come here. You can watch from home or at your convenience. So in between any of your sporting events, you can watch and catch up. Baseball's over. What's that?
Basketball? Is that what that is?
The link will be in the weekly folder for next week.
I didn't know, like if you're supposed to Monday or.
Well, I'll have it recorded probably as soon as I make it. So it may even be at the end of this week. It'll be recorded.